My name is Commissioner Frank Avila, and I'm a commissioner at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. And today the name of our show is Environmental Crisis, Causes and Remedy. And I have with me today an expert on the environmental crisis. And his name is Dr. Theodore Steck. He's a professor at the University of Chicago in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, and he's a former chair of the Environmental Study Program at the University of Chicago. And Ted, the environment, you know, we pick up the paper and we see global warming, climate change, pollution, destroying Lake Michigan of our freshwater supply, pigs or cows get loose on our farms, creating E. coli, and everyone is concerned about the environment. And so when we hear about the environment crisis, what does this mean? And is it really happening? And also why? Those are the first three questions that you can answer and help the audience.
Okay, I'll try. Well, environmental crisis. So it turns out that there are more and more human beings on this planet every year. There are about 10 times more people than there were at the start of the Industrial Revolution. That is good. That's the Industrial Revolution protects us and allows us to prosper, and so more and more people. And all of these people, or most of them, have richer and richer lives and more beneficial activities, but also more impact. And so the environmental crisis, as people call it, is because so many people, so much activity, so much impact is taking a toll on a finite planet. It's like having a household with a few people in it, and suddenly there are 10 times more people.
Yes.
And it's a finite world, and so this intensification, let's say, is building up and steadily, faster and faster. We see, as you said, the results are all around us. The climate is changing, but also it's not just climate change. Forests are being depleted, the quality of water, the fish in the ocean,
Yes.
The soil, the animals and plants on the earth, they're all sort of suffering from the burden of this human activity.
Yeah, and you know, was it recently in the UN, you had what, 100 and I forget how many countries, 168
180,
or 180 countries came together, and I guess it was the first time signing an agreement.
Yes.
How to solve our climate change.
Right.
And this is the first time it ever happened.
Well, they're taking the next step, and it's a struggle because some people think it has to be done, and other people fear what the downside is going to be.
Yes.
And so there's a dialogue with politics.
Politics, because you mentioned that the industrial countries,
Right.
America is considered a first world country because we're very industrial. We have a lot of companies manufacturing that to make products to make it easier to live, as compared to a third world country.
Right.
And the third world countries want to be a first world country.
Exactly.
So both first world and third world is creating this environment.
Right. We're all on the same path.
Right.
The industrial countries are out ahead, but we're all heading the same direction. And what the less developed countries want is to be just like us. So we have to ask ourselves, we're about 5% of the world's population.
5%?
If all the people in the world live the way we do, can the Earth sustain it?
Yes.
And that's what leads to the concept, well, maybe we're heading toward a crisis because we have to do things differently in the 21st century, or our descendants will suffer accordingly.
And that's the crisis. Yeah. Population.
Right.
And easier way of living.
Well, not easier, but more and more intense.
More
energy, more material,
energy.
And more people enjoying it. And so it's all accelerating.
So is requiring more energy, is that what's causing the environment crisis then?
Well, it's a big part of it. Each person in the United States, without knowing it, is sort of using 40 pounds of fuel a day, of fossil fuel. 40 pounds.
And
that's a lot.
40 pounds of
Every
fossil
day.
fuel
Yeah,
every
because,
day.
because, well, yeah, you can say, well, I'm just sitting home doing nothing,
Yeah.
but they're trucking in the food to you, and
Oh,
they're flying in your relatives, so you can be sitting still, and that's the amount of energy we're going through.
And the fossil fuel that is created, and you said every person.
Yeah, averaged out. Yeah, 40 pounds.
40 pounds
a day.
And this fossil fuel, and we're living here in Cook County, Illinois, and our energy is predominantly from nukes or from fossil fuel, or a combination of both, because of the grids.
Yes, in the Chicago area, 75% is nuclear, 25% is coal, and then a tiny amount from other sources, a little bit of wind, not much else.
Sure.
So we are nuclear, and therefore, they say our footprint is lighter than in other places where they're burning a lot of coal, let's say. But when other areas are burning coal, whether it's in West Virginia or China, that carbon dioxide spreads around the world.
And even though we have, and you mentioned 75%, the percentages of energy, is that we all work on a grid.
Right.
So maybe we're not buying it from our new energy here.
Right.
Maybe we're buying from a fossil fuel.
Right. Yes.
And that's where we're providing us the
Correct.
energy.
Yeah. Well, in fact, my wife and I are buying wind power. Through ComEd, right, from wind installations in the state of Illinois. But I can't tell the difference. It all comes right out the outlet, so I don't know where that electron's coming from.
And explain fossil fuel, when someone uses energy that uses fossil fuel as their energy to create the energy.
Right.
That creates what? That emits what? The CO2?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Right.
And that has an effect not only on climate change, but on the health of a person, on his respiratory system.
Well, that's not the carbon dioxide, but when you burn coal, let's say, you're emitting other kinds of minerals as well.
Sure.
Sulfur dioxide, mercury goes in the lake, sulfur dioxide makes acid rain, and also makes little particles, as you said, when they go into your lungs, they can cause respiratory diseases, heart disease, asthma, missed work days, missed school days, a big health burden that we're paying. That's part of the cost then that we're enduring so that we can have electricity.
And this is part of the crisis.
That's right.
The population,
right,
the products that we buy, even though you mentioned we're sitting at home,
right,
and we didn't do let's say we didn't do anything all week,
right,
but we still have to, we still have to eat and drink,
right,
and we still maybe have to buy some clothing,
right,
furniture, or whatever we need to buy for that week.
The biggest one right now is the heating of our homes.
Heating our homes.
Big cost as far as burning oil, coal, natural gas, carbon dioxide emissions.
Sure.
So it's part of the way we live. And in a way, we can't help it. There are so many people. We can't all live in the sunny part of Africa where we originated, or in San Diego. We're crowded. So some of us live in Chicago or in Canada, and we need heat. So how do we get it? Now, here's where the solutions come in. We don't have to get it from fossil
now here in
fuels.
this audience, Dr. Steck is going to explain the solution. On we have environment. The name of the show is Environment Crisis, Causes and Remedy. And the causes is by the increase in population. We're in a first world country. We're living in an industrial area here, and we enjoy the way we live. Are we going to go back to the way 200 years ago, the way people used to live, or are we going to stay where we're at, or maybe increase our comfort?
Yes, we're going to increase our comfort.
Yeah.
Because we are going to respond to the crisis as we have to other crises.
As a human being.
As well as a society.
As a society.
We're going to get to work. And that's the 21st century will be the century in which we straighten all this out.
21st century. Now,
it'll take a century.
Good. I'm glad we mentioned, he's talking about the 21st century. But who's going to be in the 21st century? Is it going to be me or Dr. Steck that are going to live for the next 20 years or 30 years? Or is it going to be our children that we have to provide better education in the grammar school, high school, and college to overcome these crises? And this is the key.
Right.
Education
I agree.
is the key.
Sure.
And who's the first teachers? The parents.
Right.
And so we have to educate now. We have to educate the parents because they're first teachers of the kids. We have to provide better schools. So here we're going to have Dr. Steck going to explain how to solve this remedy.
Well, well, in the short time I have, let's say it does start with citizens, the parents who are also citizens. They vote. They have to educate themselves, and above everything else, Commissioner, people have to want this. Okay. If they're indifferent, if they're against it, if they are ideological and say, I don't believe in global warming, it's not going to happen.
So you mentioned the first thing, citizen and vote.
Yes.
How does citizen and vote come into play for solving the crisis?
Well, right now, I think every candidate running for president is being asked, what is your stand on climate change?
Okay, so we're in election mode right
That's
now,
right?
And
And we, the public, are listening.
So you mean politics plays a role in
absolutely.
solving this environment?
Well, it'll have to, right?
Have to?
Because we either will stimulate science and technology and economics and business to go in one direction, or we won't. We'll just let it drift. Okay, but we will solve the problem. I'll give you a simple example. The catalytic converter on your car, right? That at one point it was thought, oh, that's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to hurt the auto industry and so forth. These days, people would think it would be unthinkable not to have catalytic converters. Why? Because the quality of our life is increased by it. So that's all. That's the whole deal, right? Are we willing to innovate? Are we willing to make changes? Are we willing to take a longer view, not the short-term view? Are we willing to see that it's society as a whole that's going through this? We're all driving, and even if we don't drive, we're breathing the air. And if we come together, we ask the political system to do what's right, good things happen. And so we're just beginning to do this.
We're just beginning. Because, you know, that's true, because what Dr. Steck mentioned is that for us to solve this environment crisis, we live in America, where we pass laws and regulations. And how do we pass laws and regulations? We pass laws and regulations by, we have different groups making their opinion known, or by through voting. That if a candidate comes in and doesn't want to help the environment, and that's where we have to educate the public out there on the right candidate, because if we don't educate and we elect the wrong candidate, maybe we're not going to solve the environment crisis. And it's very important. I'm glad you brought this up. Citizen and vote. And on the right issues.
And the kids, when the kids, by the time they're voters, environment and citizenship and quality of life will go together. Clean air, clean water, the fish in the ocean, which are being depleted, they won't have any of it. It'll just be part of the outlook on a healthy planet and a healty environment, what people want for themselves.
That's, you know, our office, I'm the commissioner at the Water Reclamation District, and I think we're the only agency here in the state, and we're the fourth largest agency. We're $1.4 billion that we deal with the environment. You know, I know you do. The biggest discussion is a couple months ago, where we had this one company want to discharge the sludge and ammonia into Lake Michigan because they want to upgrade the refinery system, because they didn't want to depend on the overseas oil. They wanted to bring in oil from Alaska. It was a lower grade, and for them to process that lower grade of oil, they had to upgrade the facility, and that will create more sludge and ammonia, and they want to discharge that in Lake Michigan. And the state EPA allowed them to do it, and this is where politics comes into play. And so there's pros and cons on it now.
Yes, but you could say the citizens rose up on that one and got organized, and also it's a question of short-term gain versus long-term gain. If we pollute Lake Michigan, we're losing one of our greatest resources. If the world fishes the fish out of the ocean, which we're now doing, and we don't have a long-term view that says, well, we should fish, but only to the degree that the numbers of fish stay the same. We'll just skim the excess, but we won't dip into it. It's like spending your bank account. You want to live off the interest. You don't want to spend on the principal, or you'll be broke. And that's the environmental challenge. And when you ask, will there be a good economic solution? Yes, and it will be preserve nature as the principle, as the basis upon which we draw, but don't spend down nature's resources, or they'll be gone.
Don't deplete it.
Don't deplete it.
Don't deplete, because
and don't degrade it.
And don't degrade it. Well, that's the key. Deplete it and degrade it, because at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, one of our duties is to protect the water supply. Mm-hmm. Our water supply is Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan is part of the Great Lakes. Mm-hmm. And you know, of all the surface water in the world, 1% is fresh water.
Right.
And they say that 18% of that 1% of that surface water, or fresh water, is here in the Great Lakes.
Right.
And then they also say that 90% of the fresh water in the United States is right here in the Great Lakes.
That's right.
So maybe we're going to see more people moving up here in the Great Lakes area because of our depletion of water that we're having in the southwestern part of the state, the country, and not only in the southwestern part of the country, but in our outlying counties.
That's right.
Because what's going on now in our outlying counties?
Yes. Well, you know, I mean, drought, let's say, is stricken the southeast and the southwest, raging forest fires. People can say this has nothing to do with global warming. You can't prove it. Yeah. But as time goes on, we have more hurricanes, more violent storms, more floods, more droughts. More droughts lead to more floods, erosion of the soil, and then mudslides, and all this is intensifying all over the world. Yes. You know? And so when you ask me, you know, is there an environmental crisis? Well, you have to put two and two together and ask the question, even if we're not sure, do we want to take this risk? Isn't now the time to be prudent and farsighted and head off any possible risk? And I'm saying we'll come out ahead. It's not going to cost, it will cost something, everything costs something, but the trade-off will put us ahead. Just like these days, you and I make trade-offs that put us ahead. Yeah. And that's how the economy should work. And if we ignore the downside and let the Earth become depleted and degraded, then we're losing invaluable resources.
So as a human being, are we consuming more than the Earth can provide?
Yes.
Is that what's happening now?
Yeah, to give you a one-word answer, yes, and I'll explain why. Because, as I said, the industrial countries are going full tilt. The developing countries are chasing after us and catching up. Yes.
And the developed countries are China, India,
and most of the world.
Most of the world, yes.
Out of 6.5 billion people, there's about 1 billion rich, and the rest not so rich, and some very poor. And they all want just what you and I have.
Yes.
So okay, and they're entitled to it.
And they're being aware more because of internet.
Absolutely.
I mean, the world. You know, my neighbor when I was growing up used to be my next door neighbor, but now my neighbor is the whole world because we're so close. Because on the internet. Has changed the world.
Right. One TV set in a village changes everything. Suddenly their eyes are open. Right? Yes. So there's reason to think that we may be sort of heading toward a wall. You know, and then the wall is: are there enough resources to go around? Yeah. And the answer has to be yes, because we live on this planet. It's like living in a house. We have to make do. Yeah. Now, how do we make do? Well, we get smart. And there's a thing called smart growth. So you asked me, will the economy continue to grow? Yes, but it'll be smarter than we are now, because we're used to all of our traditions and our outlook are based on a time hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago when there weren't many people and there was lots of nature. Yeah. Now there are lots of people and less nature to go around. And so we have to turn the whole thing around. So there's a revolution in our thinking that is occurring, and the school kids are already into it. They're learning about this in school.
And the kids, I believe that the kids are the ones that have to solve this problem, because it's not going to be a year or 2 or 5 years to solve the problem. It's going to take time.
But on an ethical level, are we going to sort of party and say that's their problem? No. Or are we going to help them and provide to future generations? Yes. And so a lot of environmentalists are really ethical or religious in their motivation. They want to be fair to future generations. So taking care of the environment is taking care of people, our descendants.
Yeah. And, you know, as I mentioned, the 180 countries you mentioned that came out of the UN session where they're going to try and help global change at the district. And I'm an elected official. Mm-hmm. You know, we run for an office countywide, but at the district, there's several things we do. We treat wastewater. Mm-hmm. And wastewater, once we treat wastewater, that's wastewater is our human waste. You know, you wash your dishes or you live in a combined area, storm water. But at the end of the treatment, when we treat wastewater, we have 550 tons of biosolids. Now, biosolids is human manure. We give that to the farmers to grow.
Right.
And the session in, I forgot what country where the UN met, but 180 countries, Bali,
right.
They signed an agreement to subsidize your countries that have the rainforest.
Right.
And the rainforest is essential for the planet.
That's right.
Because they take in the CO2s.
Exactly.
And so our biosolids, which is human manure, we give it to the farmers to grow, and the nutrients in the biosolids is so rich that when the farmers use this in growing their crops, and when the plants grow, they absorb the CO2. So that's helping climate change.
Absolutely, that's right. And so it's one world, and it's a global economy, and it's also trade-offs. So everything you just said fits into an environmental perspective about how we can get smart, basically, and turn human waste into a useful product.
Yes.
And that isn't even revolutionary thinking.
No.
For thousands of years, people used night soil, right?
Right.
Human waste to fertilize their land.
Yeah.
They used manure to fertilize their land.
Yeah.
And now we're just going to do it so much better than has ever been done before.
And so by and you mentioned that we could reduce pollution.
Yes.
Now, what are some of the sources of pollution?
Well, right now everybody's talking about global warming, climate change.
Yeah.
That's the big one. Burning fossil fuels. And whatever your outlook, we're going to cut back on oil and gas and coal that emit carbon dioxide. And one way to do that, let's say coal. Well, this country is very rich in coal.
Yes.
The state's very rich in coal. If we could take the carbon dioxide that's emitted as we burn the coal and bury it in the ground, then we've got a vast supply of inexpensive, clean energy.
And I think
so that's where the scientific frontier is. But that means that the government has to support research to make that happen, and that means the public has to tell the government, we want to bury that carbon dioxide, and that means the educational system and the religious community and every community, the educational system has to make this happen.
Yeah.
The politicians won't do it unless somebody makes them do it.
I'm glad you brought that up because research. Right. I think we have to spend more money on research to help this environmental crisis we're having. And we have a combination of kids growing up to educate them. We have to have research projects that will benefit the environmental research, and our government has to spend more money. And I think in Europe, they're spending more money per capita than what we spend here in the United States. Yes. And we have to elect a president or elect officials, even on a local government, that understands the process of where to spend our money. Because before the show, we were talking about, I would like to find an economist that we could talk about cost benefit in regards to the environment. And the word is, we're all talking about green economics. What when we say green economics, what does that mean, green economics?
So green is the environmental color. So it means using economics, which has made us rich over these last few hundred years, and put environment in the center of it, and say it's not enough just to make money in the short term, the quick buck. It's that the environment is a vast resource. It's our support system, and so we have to use economics to obtain sustenance from nature, but not to draw it down and destroy it. And so there are lots and lots of outstanding economists now who are thinking of ways to do this. And for example, taxing fossil fuels or taxing carbon dioxide. Now people say, oh, we don't want more taxes.
Yeah.
So economists would say, well, what if we reduce the federal income tax $1 for every dollar we apply to taxing fossil fuels? So your taxes are the same. You're not losing $1, the economy's humming. But what's the difference? Well, the difference is, instead of taxing you for being a wage earner, why should we tax you for being a productive citizen? We'll tax the bad part, which is you're burning too much fossil fuels. So as a result, you shift the taxes around, and now you're giving people an incentive. Oh, the $4, $5 a gallon of gas. I think I'll take public transportation. I think I'll buy a compact car.
Yeah.
Whatever the solution, and you're working with the economic system, a trade-off, and what you end up with is the government hasn't raised your taxes at all, and it's allowed you to make a choice to live more economically, and if you really are economical, you come out ahead. Lower taxes and less money to get to work, and the economists have just changed the playing field a little bit so that we can make wise environmental decisions without hurting the economy.
You know, I would love to do a whole show on green economics.
Sure.
Because I think that that's the key.
Yes.
Because the key, I think, in our discussion and when I'm talking with you, that here in America, we live in a country where everyone has a right to run for office.
Right.
And every citizen has a right to vote.
Right.
So it appears that politics comes into play. You have to go out there and elect the right candidate that is going to solve our environmental problems. You bring in the religious group, because the religious group has a view also, and because they cover every Sunday, your various religious organizations have millions of people coming to church.
Right.
And the first book in the Bible, Genesis, is when creation of the earth. It took him 7 days. He created the water, the animals, the plants, the earth. I mean, so they have a role to play.
Right.
And that's what I'm getting from this topic. I mean, is this what you're trying to say? That go out and elect a candidate that's going to help the environment.
But also it might be when your religious congregation, you want to hear more about the environment within your religious group. You know, people say it's God's green earth, right?
Yes.
And it's up to us to be good stewards and all that. So it can happen on all these levels, and it's called a cultural change. And the new culture is going to be an environmental culture. It better be, right?
Yes.
Because we're not going to just spend down our precious resources and leave the future scrambling and hard-pressed. That's not going to happen.
And, you know, they're always talking about a sustainability development, that whatever you do, you have to sustain it.
Right.
What does that mean?
Well, sustainable development is somewhat of a cliche, but what it means to me is development means that we're going to make progress. We're going to go forward. So we're not going to slip back, as you said, to before the Industrial Revolution. We're going to go forward, but maybe having better rather than more. Better lives rather than bigger, you know. So it means high quality. It doesn't necessarily mean more of everything. And development means, sustainability means we're going to keep going.
Keep going?
Yeah, and we're not going to, we don't have an apocalyptic vision. We have a vision that there's a good future for everyone.
Yeah, and you know, and our government has to spend more money on research.
Absolutely.
We have to spend money on